Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guests are Nephilim Death Squad. First, check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, where we feature some of your favorite content creators. Also, watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana. That's available on Tubi, multiple streaming platforms. We're booking guests for February. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Nephilim Death Squad. They are a group of unlikely heroes determined to unravel the mysteries of the universe and expose the truth behind the world's most notorious conspiracies, the paranormal, occult, and the hidden history of humanity. Gentlemen, welcome. How y'all doing?
Doing good, brother. Thanks for having us back. How long has it been now? It's not been too long, but you know, the speed of things makes it feel like it's been a year at least. Probably been a few months, but thanks for having us back, man. We're doing all right.
What, 7, 8 psyops ago, something like
that. That's a great way to measure things these days.
So it could be 2 weeks, could be 3 months.
Right on. Well, welcome back, gentlemen. I enjoyed our conversation last time. I'm looking forward to getting weird again today. And man, 2025 is here. The Orange Emperor is about to be sworn in. So many incredible possibilities for 2025. And it's like choose your own Armageddon adventure. Will it be World War III, aliens, an EMP, cosmic supernova, AI brain parasites? So many possibilities. And we're not going to discuss any of those today because you guys brought me some very interesting topics that I'd love to get into. And hell, we may swing back to that. Who knows? But what you were mentioning to me before we got started today, it really perked my interest. Something about K2, which is the synthetic marijuana, and how it affects people's perception, what they're seeing when under the influence, and this gets very crazy, and also something very strange occurring in Indiana, and this will probably branch off into many other strange rabbit holes, so very much looking forward to hearing more about this. Before we do, it's been a little while since you've been on, so like you said a few psyops ago, just remind the audience a little bit about yourselves and let them know where they can find you.
So I am David Lee Corbo, aka The Raven, one half of Nephilim Death Squad. You can find me on Twitter, which is where I do most of my, I guess, disrupting of the official narrative. That's going to be at David L. Corbo on Twitter. You can find Nephilim Death Squad pretty much anywhere that you find your podcast. We got a little presence on Instagram, but for us, it just feels more fun on Twitter because it's much easier to make people angry, which has become a bit of a pastime for us. So yeah, you can find me over on Twitter, David L. Corbo, and you can find Nephilim Death Squad pretty much anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Top. Oh, something's wrong with his audio here. I think he's not hearing us.
No,
he's got some little bit of a situation, but I can, while he's doing that, we can always bounce back to him. I would like to describe a little bit about what's going on with this K2 situation you alluded to before we started. Since the last time we were on your show, we've started a new series called NDS Chronicles. And what Chronicles is our way of hearing from the viewer, because on our show, we tend to listen to a lot of respective experts in their field. Oh, there we go. We got Top Lobster.
Sorry, yeah. Roadcaster,
go ahead. Do your let people know where they can find you, brother.
Toplobster.com. You can buy some shirts there. Top Lobster with an A. You see behind me. Everywhere else, all social media. That's where you can find me. All right. Hopefully this thing doesn't mess up. Go ahead, David.
It's Roadcaster, the premier company in podcasting equipment, just crushing all the time.
It's like if you yourself want audio issues every single episode, Roadcaster's for you. But hey, you can make some you got a soundboard. So there you go.
So that's cool. NDS Chronicles was our way of, instead of having people come in and delve into one topic really deeply and kind of disseminate all their information that they have on it.
We're big fans of Merkel's show, Tony Merkel's show, The Confessionals. And we're like, some of these episodes are great. And then some of these seem like torture. Like if you get a person that's just really can't hold a conversation, or maybe it's they write an email to you and then it turns out that it's a 10-minute story. And you're like, well, this is an hour-and-a-half show. So I don't know what we're going to do for the rest of the time. So we just said, you know what? Write the emails to us. Please fix your punctuation. Use paragraphs and periods. Commas are nice as well. And we read it at our own pace. It's a lot of fun.
So what we discovered more or less through this process is
our
a
fans
pattern.
Are retarded. Oh, right. Yes.
Exactly. So we start getting all this paranormal testimony flowing in from people. Near-death experiences, all kinds of really genuinely fascinating stuff. It's quickly becoming one of my favorite things to do, but we noticed a theme develop. It was like one person after another was like, hey, harrowing demonic encounter, went to hell. My soul fell out of the bottom of my feet. I was received by some sort of entity, underground. And all of this was provoked by the usage of K2 or spice, which is something that maybe some of your listeners are familiar with. Seemingly all of our listeners are familiar with it. But it was years ago, they created this synthetic marijuana alternative. And, it was really popular for people that didn't want to smoke weed, didn't want to have,
I tried it once in I think it was early 2000s, I guess, when it first started to come around. I can't remember the exact time period, but I was working where I was getting piss tested.
There you go.
And I said, well, fuck it, I'll just try this stuff. And I freaked the hell out. It was the worst experience I could have ever imagined. Paranoia, just terror, and I couldn't wait for the shit to wear off. Luckily, it only lasted 20 minutes, but never, ever again.
Yeah, well, we've talked to a guy or read the story of a guy who watched his friend, in his words, become possessed on it.
Yeah, dude, we don't talk to these people. They're filled.
Yeah, we don't talk to them. No, it's very dangerous. They all seemingly have demonic attachments. It's best to keep it at email's length. So, we've heard stories of, after this moment, for the next 10 years of my life, I feel like I was followed by something dark, something that wished me ill intent, and they just keep coming in. And now it's to the point where, we've done some research on it. And we found some pretty interesting things. What was the guy's name? Dr. something Hoffman or Huffman?
Dr. John W. Huffman. He was a organic chemist and a researcher and professor at Clemson University in the mid 90s. So he developed they're working on cannabinoid receptors. And just to see how they can either enhance or decrease the ability to intake the THC from the weed. And he stumbles upon this compound, so he names it after himself. It's a JWH, sounds like Jewish, but it's really for John W. Huffman, 018. And that turned into a synthetic cannabinoid that was then distributed recreationally across America and probably the world. And this dude he's quoted as saying, one of my biggest regrets in life is developing this. I'm not sure how much he had to do with distributing this throughout the world, but he certainly developed it. So it seems like somebody took it and was like, hey, let's just run with this. It's a legal weed. For whatever reasons they did this, but perhaps they didn't know the side effects. Perhaps they did understand what it was doing.
Yeah, it's almost, you can almost look at it nefariously, right? Because I don't know how much of an industry gets built around this thing for monetary purposes, but when you have this overwhelming, feedback that says hey, this is bad, this is highly anxiety inducing, this puts you in a very dark place, and at the highest levels, people are claiming to have these entity encounters. This guy very much had his Oppenheimer moment, right? It's I have become death, destroyer of worlds. This guy is not pumped that he created this thing and then watched it be loosed on the world. It's almost the same thing as like the guy who made the PCR test, where he's like, this is not what it should be used for. So often throughout history, you get these people that have a breakthrough scientifically, one way or another, and then some sort of industry comes along and monopolizes their breakthrough, and then these people watch to their dismay as it wreaks havoc on the general public. So it's one of those type of situations.
Over here, yeah, they've been listed as about 100 different compounds of the JWH variety. So starting with 018, I suppose that there were 17 before that, but 018 was the one that they were going to use on people, and they did. And it goes all the way to like JWH 250. As people are having tachycardia and, you know, insane hallucinations, confusion, eating other people's faces, no problem. They're like, all right, well, we can't use this. So they just go to the next one, and they go to the next one and the next one. And then they develop an HU series, a CP series, not child, you know, but CP is just, this one's actually created by Pfizer, which is a lot of fun.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it goes to like all different kinds of derivatives of this. There's estimated to be about 500 of them out there.
So I remember back in the day, they had to keep changing the compounds because of the legality factor.
Mhm.
They'd catch up to it and they'd ban a certain substance, and then they'd tweak it a little bit so they could redistribute it. And you'd only find it in these like head shops or gas stations or behind the counter and stuff like that. But I stopped following that a long time ago. I had no idea this was still a thing, especially with all the legal weed out there. But that's crazy, man.
I mean, otherwise, it was like it's really kind of a potpourri, which is very strange. It's like, I think they're taking a sort of a scented bouquet and they're spraying this chemical on it. That's what it seems to be, because at its core, it even is described on these, like you said, you get it at head shops and at gas stations. It comes in like a silver sort of a Ziploc bag. And if you look at it, it even uses the language potpourri, which, if anybody's familiar with that, goes in a small dish on your coffee table, makes your house smell like old people. You know, it was something that used to be commonly used as like a, you know, an air freshener or something like that. So it's very strange. That's why I tend to look at it a little bit nefariously, because it's not a product that is crushing. It's not something that you'd want to invest in, because the market is really you know, permeable for this sort of a product right now. It's not turning a gigantic profit, and yet it's being pushed as this, you know, safe alternative to marijuana for folks, like you said, don't want to get piss tested at my job, don't want to get piss tested at like probation or something like that. If you're a teenager, you did something dumb, you're on probation for a little bit. Well, hey, just smoke this aromatic blend that you would typically see on your grandmother's coffee table, but then it takes you to hell. And it's really strange, because I can't see the, you know, step 1, potpourri, step 2, chemical compound, step 3, profit. I don't see the profit end of it. And I also don't see a tremendous industry behind it, but I do see it proliferating, and I see it causing all these horror stories. So sometimes I just tend to look at things skeptically whenever there's a drug that hits the market, because many of our drug fads in America are produced by like an intelligence agency one way or another, right? Like, we're in the middle of a fentanyl crisis, opioid epidemic. Meanwhile, we were recently in control of the largest concentration of poppy fields in America. I mean, in the world, when we controlled Afghanistan. And then, of course, you have the crack epidemic of the 80s that destroyed countless households within the Black community. Come to find out that it was the intelligence agencies funding the Iran-Contra wars and flooding the hood with cocaine. And then even the psychedelic movement was kind of a Laurel Canyon, you know, CIA operation. And so I look at this and I go, is this the same thing? And I almost wonder if they've detached from that, because the industry has developed such around marijuana that they are now creating these strains that are super hyperactive in the THC and very low in CBD, the anti-anxiety sort of calming compound that you find in marijuana. And so maybe they go, well, we don't need spice anymore. We don't need K2. We have this highly psychedelic marijuana. Now we're all constantly on a low dose of like anxiety inducing drug. To me, it doesn't feel natural. I don't think it's a profit thing. I think it's a cultural people manipulation thing.
If you could pull up this screen that I'm trying to share here, I'll just show you something very interesting, because it's a drug that has gone away in its popularity in our culture, in our society, but it's still prevalent in the things that it's doing. And but the not on this screen, but one of the more recent things. You remember the guy in Coney Island? It was a couple weeks ago that he set somebody on fire and on the F train and just watched her burn. I guess he poured gasoline. It was like some migrant or whatever. He sets this lady on fire and just stands there and watches her burn. This is where I used to live, so I'm like, I know this station. It's just a bizarre scene, and people are recording, and the lady she's in shock, so she's just on fire, smoldering.
Yeah,
dude,
this was pretty recently. This was like a couple of weeks ago. It was like fully viral on Twitter, and it was like one of those things where you look at like, oh, we're late stage fall of an empire kind of a deal.
And everyone's like, oh, it's the migrants, the damn, and it's like, hey, listen, I'm with you there. Like, all right, like let's not move the third world into this country. Yeah, sure, but there's a very like small part in this article where you're reading through it, and it's like this guy was addicted to K2/spice. I was like, huh, weird. Yeah. So then, and then, like even more, a little bit before that, we have the guy Daniel Penny. He's the dude with the curly hair that choked out that guy, the Michael Jackson impersonator on the subway. And he gets exonerated and he's released in court. No wrongdoing for killing this guy, however this plays out. Again, go ahead and read. I have this article here pulled up. But subway chokehold victim Jordan Neely's uncle says nephew was medicating with K2 before death. And he calls for arrest of Daniel Penny. So it's just another one of these things where you're like, why does this drug keep popping up in these insane situations?
Yeah.
Right.
I think we have our answer.
Well, let's talk about the effects of some of these substances you said, like psychedelics, not only to alter our perception, but seemingly take our consciousness completely into different realms. I'm sure you've all heard the stories about those people who had psychedelic experiences, and they're taken to a completely different world, and they may, in their perception, it's a whole lifetime that they spend there. They may have a family and kids with these different entities, and then all of a sudden they're sucked back into reality, and they're traumatized for like months or years, and they don't know how to cope with reality anymore. This is the most fascinating aspect of this to me, the possibility that just by taking a substance that can alter our perception, it can completely separate our consciousness and take it wherever the fuck it will go, wherever these realms are. That is a crazy aspect to me.
So that's like one of the most famous instances of, the story that you just told, right? Having a family and everything. In a different realm. It comes from Ari Shafir, interestingly enough, and I think it's going to be part of this conversation on the Joe Rogan Experience, and we'll get into why that is later on. But Ari does salvia, and salvia is, I've done salvia before. It's a very short trip, and it does radically alter your perception and seemingly transports you to another reality. For me, I went into a very two-dimensional world and felt like I was on the pages of a book, and everything that I perceived was made up of two-dimensional geometric patterns. It was interesting because the geometry was actually the profile of a pharaoh with the long hat, and that is what made up. It was just that the spaces in between pharaoh heads were also pharaoh heads, very much like that bird illusion where they're touch wingtip to wingtip, and even the spaces between them creates birds. But what Ari experience is he does salvia. He goes and lives a life under the ocean and has a family and children, has a job, has an everyday life that he goes through. And it is my understanding is a very long time, several months. And so during that time, he becomes bonded to this family and cares about them deeply, as one would with their own family. And long story short, when he returns, he's experiencing a longing for that family, and he slips into a depression because of it. So yeah, I mean, these things will take you to another realm. But I think, we have to be asking ourselves, because very recently you had Tucker Carlson, he's on the Sean Ryan show, and he's saying something to the extent of, in the West, we have lost our understanding of the spiritual realm. And he even suspects that it's happened nefariously, that we've been purposely detached from it. And so there are spiritual realms, there are other realms, but we are more unequipped to explore them than we ever have been, I would argue. I think that ancient man had a much better map for these realms. And like this realm, if you get lost in the woods, you may get attacked by a mountain lion. You know what I mean? There are things that are harmless. There are things that are harmful. There are things that are beneficial to you. You know, you can find things to help yourself forage and survive in the forest, but it is filled with danger. I think these realms are very similar to that, where you encounter these entities and we lack the discernment to be able to tell the nature of them. What do they want? We talked to a guy named Paul Stobbs of Understanding Conspiracy. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he is a great content creator. I highly recommend speaking to him. He has his theories, and they're pretty well researched on the nature of the DMT realm, which, you know, does connect to this whole Rogan thing that I was alluding to before. And it's his estimation that the entities you encounter in the DMT realm, these machine elves and these jesters, are actually the disembodied spirits of what was previously physical entities that used to roam the earth, but they were chimeric abominations. And so when they died, their souls did not ascend anywhere. They're just trapped here in a parallel realm. So the way he described it was, you have a beautiful decadent rug with all this, you know, all these colors and patterns and everything, and you put it in your living room and it augments it. It makes it beautiful. But the underside of the rug is all this like really unappealing, kind of ugly cross stitching. The cross stitching is necessary to hold that realm together, but it's not what you like looking at. Well, these things, it's like we exist on the tapestry end, this beautiful world that we inhabit. And this other realm that's made up of kind of confusing living geometry and entities is the cross stitching that holds that rug together. And what lives there are likely the children, the offspring of fallen angels that rebelled against God. They would have been called the Nephilim in the Bible. And they were these monsters. And when they died, their spirits went nowhere. They were just stuck in that realm. And they whisper to us, they, you know, influence us, and they like it very much when we go there and see them. So if Paul Stobbs is real, then that's got some pretty big ramifications.
Right on. It makes me think of the MK Ultra-like experimentation that's been going on for years to alter the collective's perception. We know that everything is part of a larger agenda. There's layers to everything that's rolled out by the parasitic ruling class. Could it be that throughout these past decades of altering the collective perception and feeding us drugs with the 60s and 70s culture creation and LSD and all the things that we were just talking about, could it be that, one, all of these substances have been purposefully altered and tweaked so that when they are used, the only thing we can reach are these negative, obscure realms and entities? And on top of that, our perception has been altered so much that we don't have the ability to discern whether we're interacting with good entities, bad entities, or what the hell we're interacting with at all. So it could be all kind of layered as part of this nefarious thing.
Well, so I think that there might be something to that, where I'm not sure that you can reach heaven using a psychedelic here. It might just be like locked off to you. It seems like when people have these experiences where they're talking to, or where a god or an angel will approach them, it's just that they are approached by an angel, not necessarily they're knocking on that door. But the Bible does say that you're allowed to, actually it encourages, it says test the spirits. So when something comes to you and it's telling you this or that, you're allowed to ask it, like, who are you? And, what's your relationship to the creator of all of this stuff? And you could ask it specific questions. It has to answer, because there are rules. So yeah, you could use your discernment, but and that's not to say there's going to be a lot of people like, oh, I took DMT, I took mushrooms, and I had this great experience and this and that, and I spoke with these things and they gave me knowledge and it was really nice. And yeah, I think all that stuff is true, but I just would be suspicious of it. I wouldn't.
I also think that there's multiple different realms, right? So it's not just like, there's like a heavenly realm. There's also this, if the DMT realm is sort of this prison that these entities are locked in, that's one place you can go, but it seems like there's a lot of them, right? But to go to this Joe Rogan thing, and then it also does play into this much larger question about whether or not we've been purposely siloed into negative realms and stripped of our understanding. So Rogan has two things that, and I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan's podcast, and I'm not necessarily saying he's doing this nefariously, although he might be doing this at the behest of some coaching or some influencing, because you have to figure that, we're talking about the Laurel Canyon thing, right? You see how influential the intelligence agencies can be when they decide to be. They created they co-opted and steered the anti-war movement. They co-opted and blew up the psychedelic movement. They do the same thing with hip hop. It's constantly this like they invade a cultural movement, they co-opt it, and then they turn it into something nefarious. So why wouldn't you do that with the biggest podcast in the world, is all I'm saying. So when it comes to Rogan, he's pushing two things to me that are pretty alarming. One of them is DMT, and it's not like he's pushing it. He's just co-signing it, right? He's like, I've done this thing. It's profound. And he talks quite a bit about it. And if it truly is a realm where these adversarial entities are locked, well, you have to ask yourself, isn't it strange then that this is what we're being funneled into? A lot of people, are influenced by Rogan one way or another. We talked to a guy who kind of went through all these things: meditation, yoga, sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation tanks, DMT usage. One thing leads to another. He has a negative encounter with an entity, and then suddenly his son starts hearing voices, and his son's like 11 years old. And he immediately drew the correlation between interacting with these entities and what his son was going through. And so he had to stop. He hit the brakes because all of a sudden this was, he was in dangerous territory. So the other thing that's worth mentioning here, besides the DMT thing, is the sensory deprivation tanks. You have to ask where those came from. That came from John C. Lilly. John C. Lilly was basically like a psychonaut who was trying to psychically connect with dolphins. And he was using a sensory deprivation tank in conjunction with psychedelic usage. So I think he was on like ketamine and a bunch of other things. Apparently he had some success where he was able to communicate with these things. In fact, the dolphins bonded to him in a pretty significant way. Things got weird. Apparently he's jerking off the dolphins, or his assistant is jerking off the dolphins. But the intelligence agencies took a big interest in these, projects, because they've always had an interest in the psychic abilities of humanity. And I mean, you look back to these ideas of like MK Ultraing people, right? You take the Clockwork Orange thing, you slap them in a chair, you peel their eyelids open, and you subject them to androgynous dumps of psychedelics, and you expose them to some sort of brainwashing technique, right? So they had interest in what John C. Lilly was doing. There's a method to his madness. There's a psychic communication aspect. Now Rogan is advocating. This is the way I've been looking at it. Imagine being a CIA agent, MK Ultraing somebody back in the day, and seeing some real promising results, right? And then your buddy goes, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this en masse? You're like, you could never do this en masse. We don't have enough rooms. We don't have enough chairs. You can never just take this many people, right? They're kidnapping Johns from whorehouses, and they're dosing them with LSD. And they're really going through like the rigmarole. It's a difficult, these people resist. It's not easy to do this. So your buddy starts speculating, well, what if this could happen on a large scale? And you're like, couldn't be, dude. And eventually you break and you go, you know what? The only way that this could happen is if somehow people were seeking out sensory deprivation tanks on their own. If they were doing psychedelics on their own, if they were subjected in mass somehow to constant MK Ultra programming. That's the only way that this thing would ever work at scale. Fast forward to 2025. We're inundated by the propaganda machine 24/7, right? When it comes to the news cycle, like if it bleeds, it leads. It's just constantly bombarding you with the most negative shit you've ever seen. Then if you're a psychonaut, that's one thing, but you don't even have to be. You could just be a weed enjoyer. Well, the industry has tweaked it to such a degree that you're on a constant anxiety trip at all times, right? And these things too, there's a certain air of suggestibility that a lot of these psychedelics will give to a person, right? Like scopolamine, you blow it in somebody's face and then suddenly they're like a zombie. They'll do what you say. That's at the highest levels. But I think all of them have this like suggestibility factor. You become more suggestible. You become more easily influenced. So you're absorbing the propaganda machine. You're on this low-grade psychedelic at all times. Then you take it a step further. You're doing yoga, meditative practices, and maybe you're doing DMT. Maybe you're going to sensory deprivation tanks. We've officially moved from the chair with your eyeballs peeled open to a giant experiment happening at scale to virtually all of the American public. And I know, like I've just been saying it, somewhere there's an old CIA agent who's just like, punch in the air. He can't believe that this is happening to the scale that it is happening now. He would have never imagined you can get us to do it to ourselves.
And it's not even good enough for them. Like we're doing it to ourselves, but on top of that, they're also like, this is just not, it's not going quick enough. So they'll use something like COVID, which no matter where you stand on it, I mean, well, I guess it does matter where you stand on it, but I think it's pretty clearly confirmed that COVID was created in a lab and it was bioengineered to have specific characteristics. Some people compared it to AIDS, which AIDS has venoms in it, and these venoms are like conotoxins from a very poisonous snail, and they're there to basically make your body suggestible or like numb your body out in order for the virus that it's trying to transmit to get in more readily. And that's what was all throughout COVID. That's also what's in some of the COVID vaccines, depending on the brand that you get. So it's not good enough for us to be self-administering. They're also doing like the multi-tiered attack is insane. It's coming from everywhere. It's coming from the shit that they're spraying over you, which God only knows what that is. We had a guest on saying that it's possibly a light dose of Novichok, which is like it's a poison from Russia, but it has like really intense side effects. If you watch the latest movie on Netflix with what's this guy's name?
Jason Bateman.
Jason Bateman. Yeah, it's a Christmas movie with the TSA.
Yeah, I think it's called Flight Log. I might be wrong about that, but I think it's called Flight Log. It's pretty new.
About.
Yeah,
yeah. So the main chemical that the compound that's being used as the threat is Novichok. So they're like telling you that they're going to use this in this movie and it's going to kill this airplane full of people. Some people are surmising that the fog that you remember the whole fog thing that was going on. Yeah, these dense clouds, these dense fogs that are in area. They were kind of like coastal. They were all across Florida, but
making people sick.
Yeah, making people sick, making people suggestible. That it's like a low dose of Novichok for preparing people for whatever's to come. So again, it's not just good enough for us to self-administer with this John C. Lilly type MK Ultra stuff, but it's also happening on like a biological, scientific level. It's being sprayed on our heads. It's the food that I then grow. It rains on that food, and God only knows what happens. I mean, it really
isn't it true that even your water supply, like your tap water, besides the fluoridization,
yeah, I mean,
it's got like trace elements of pharmaceuticals. SSRIs are pumping through it. It's like it's multi-tiered.
If you're on city water, you're going to be getting this stuff that has fluoride in it, SSRIs, because other people are pissing and then they filter this out and then you drink this water and it's just very ancestral. I'm on my own land here and I have my own well, but even then it doesn't matter because every day I look up, they're spraying like X's over my heads. So what happens to that? That kind of stays up there. It rains, comes down into my land, into my well. I drink that. There's really no way around it. And it reminds me of the Genesis 6 story, but it's across all mythologies when the earth is just cleansed with water because things got a little bit too wild. And I feel like we're there right now in the times of Noah,
Well, as you guys are talking, it makes me wonder how much our free will is being infringed upon, how much it's being allowed to be infringed upon, not only with some of the things that we've discussed already. You can look at psychedelics and drugs and say, well, we each individually made the choice to go out and do those drugs. That's one thing. But when you look at some of the things like what they're spraying in the sky, experimentation that we're not even aware of, fog that just rolls in that can alter our consciousness, even thinking about alien abduction experiences where people are taken out of their bed, they're on a ship, they can't move, they have things being stuck in their butt, there's nothing they can do about it. Where's the free will aspect there? And is there going to be any kind of consequences for infringing upon this? What do you guys think?
So go ahead, Top.
In the Book of Kings, there's a section where God is addressing the kings, the heavenly rulers, which are the angels or the fallen, the watchers that preside over these these principalities. And he's also addressing the kings, the human kings. And to the human kings, he talks to them and he asks them questions like, why are you gay? Why are you doing this? These kind of things, not like leading, like obviously if you're talking to an all-knowing God, he's going to ask you questions that he knows the answer to, but he's asking them questions nonetheless and letting them respond as human beings. Then he turns to the heavenly bodies, the Elohim, the one that are above these kings that were supposed to be presiding over them. And he doesn't ask them questions. He just talks to them and he judges them. He just tells them straight up, this is where you're going. Your children, the ones that you've made in defilement of my law, this is what will happen to them. This is what's going to happen to you. And there's no response, there's no bargaining, there's nothing, because he's judging them. So when you're talking about the free will of people, I think we still do have free will, but that's for sure being tampered with. It's like, if you believe in this entire narrative that we lay out on Nephilim Death Squad, then you'll see the idea of why these entities, these fallen angels, these Nephilim, why they are beyond reproach, why they can't be forgiven, because they understand the rules. They've broken them immediately. It's the first thing that they did to destroy this experiment that God created when he created man, to see what they do. So yeah, I don't know. It's also a complicated thing when you're talking about, like, well, what happens to people, right? Because people mess up all the time, but it's partially our own will to mess up, to choose that thing, but it's also like huge temptation. And sometimes I feel like I'm backed into a corner, right? Where it's like, well, I'm not presented many good choices here, but I have to pick the best one for me, my family, my future. And I guess that's the best that we can do at this point.
Yeah, even outside of like the Christian worldview, I think a lot of people, because if you're New Age or whatever, you know, you're like, oh no, it's Christianity. But like, just take it in the sense of like, this realm is one where we are put here. It's almost like it to me, it feels like we're put here, and there are a lot of things wrong. There is an adversarial, group of entities that seek to subvert us. But within that pain and suffering, we're constantly given a choice. It's like, what do you do with that? Do you choose bitterness? Do you choose victimhood? Do you choose to also lie and cheat and deceive and to become the very thing that seeks to oppress you? Or do you rise over that? Right. So it's like, where's the free will? It's hard. A lot of our ideas, a lot of our decisions are not even our own, really, when it comes to not only the ideas that pass through your own mind. Some of them feel intrusive. Some of them feel like they didn't come from you. Some of them just seemingly pop out of the ether. I would argue that there are these things seeking to influence you, and you have a choice within that. It's like, do you entertain these thoughts and engage with them and then do their bidding? Or do you recognize that as not actually you and that you have a choice? And, so much of our ideas, they're just kind of pumped out by the cultural machine, right? It's kind of hard sometimes to even understand, like, if you're behaving in a way that's genuine to you, or if you're behaving in a way that you're emulating something that the propaganda machine put out, right? So many of our, like I often say, the things that people get most upset about are not even their own ideas. It's like the media tells you what to be upset about. So the free will lies in, like, if you can see that, and then you can deviate from that, or you can just go along with the flow because it's comfy and everybody else is doing it. So that's where the free will thing comes in. And then so much of this reality also seems like scripted and theatrical. Like, do you remember the movie White Noise? Not the old one with the aliens, the White Noise with the train derailment.
And I don't think I ever saw that one.
Okay, so this is actually, I'll try to make this short, but this is an unbelievable moment. And this is when I talk about like scripted reality and such. So a movie comes out about a place in Ohio. I forget what the name. Top, you don't remember the name of that place, right? Well, either way, it's in Ohio and it's in the 80s, and there's a train derailment. And I believe it's like Adam Driver is the main actor, and he's got his family, and this train derails and it spills. There's a chemical leak, and they have to evacuate the town. Now, what's significant about that is in real life, I think it was East Palestine, Ohio. Damn, I can't believe I remember that. In real life, about 2 weeks after the film comes out, East Palestine, Ohio, which, by the way, is where a lot of the actors from the film were from, right? So that's where they casted a lot of people locally from East Palestine, Ohio in this Netflix film. In our own reality, there is a train derailment, and it kind of grips the nation because we're watching this train just spill all these chemicals and the water becomes contaminated and there's all these warnings and, you can't, the air has become problematic to breathe. And it becomes this thing that we're all focused on. So as if that's not uncanny enough, if you go back and watch the film, it plays like a Kubrick film. And what I mean by that is in the background, it's rich with subliminal messaging. And it almost seems less important what's happening in the film. In fact, I would argue that the reason the movie about a train derailment was called White Noise is because that's what the film was. It was just noise. Don't worry about that. Look at the background. What's happening in the background of that film? Well, strangely enough, every time the TV's on, every time the news is on, every newspaper you see, as this family is escaping this town, they're going through a shelter situation. The military is evacuating them. By the way, if you listen to it, it's like the dialogue is like, it's compelling and it's good acting, but it tells you no story. It doesn't make any sense. It's not a linear story. There's no storytelling happening. It's very strange. In the background, all these things are showing UFOs. UFOs are landing in the news. UFOs are cited in the newspapers. That there's a talk show on in one scene. There's this and that scene. It's like everything is UFOs in the background, but it's not addressed whatsoever by the main story or the main characters. What happens in real life during the East Palestine train derailment in Ohio? We get the Chinese weather balloon.
This movie actually does take place in Ohio as well.
Yes. So it's literally in the same place. It's just in a different time, right?
Anymore.
1980s or whatever. So what ends up happening in real life is we get the Chinese spy balloon heading from the Northwest all the way to like the Southeast of America until it goes over North Carolina and is shot down just over the ocean. During that time, heavy speculation as to what this is. Is it a UFO? I, being, an unhinged schizophrenic conspiracy theorist, am latched onto this thing, watching the entire time. And let me tell you definitively, beyond a shadow of a doubt, when that was happening, 6, 7, 8 different reports from Canada, from China, all these different countries, Brazil, Uruguay. There's craft over China. Canada shot down a craft. China has Uruguay has UFOs over it. So these are all happening in the same time in the same day. And I'm thinking, oh man, we're about to barrel towards disclosure. And of course, that didn't happen. All of a sudden, those stories go away and we're isolated to just the Chinese weather balloon. We shoot it down and then the story moves on. But those two things were the biggest things that were happening at the exact same time in this country. And they were happening on the silver screen in Netflix. So what is real anymore? What is scripted? What is reality? I am of the proclivity that the vast majority of shit that we see fold on the world stage is theater. So this just goes back to the bigger question. It's like, what free will do we have within this? We are in a story and we are given options constantly every step of the way to choose the truth, to choose God, or to choose ourselves and to choose bitterness and victimhood. And look what they're doing to us. Look at that. And that just corrupts and corrodes the soul and it turns you into something terrible. So I think that's where the free will lies. Because if you look around, this is an on rails experience.
Isn't it also an IQ test? Like what I asked some. Okay, here's a good one. My friend Cole, he asked Twitter, he did a poll and he said, who would you rather watch your kids? And it was like a pedophile or a tranny. Again, this is like, right. It's a crazy out there question. Or I asked a question as well along the same lines, like, who's more American? And I said Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy or the CIA. Right. So you see how it's kind of like I'm putting, like, these aren't great answers, but pick one. Now, the smart person goes, I prefer the douche over the shit sandwich. Right. The dumb person goes, I'm not picking anything. I was like, well, you don't really have that choice. In life, I guess you do. You could just sit there and go, I'm not going to do anything and sit in your mom's basement. But really, people who are doing shit are actually making decisions. So here's your IQ test. Which do you prefer? Kamala Harris, Donald Trump? There's one right answer, right?
Right.
But both aren't great. So the person that says, I'm not going to do this at all. And I get like, you're not going to vote. You're not going to consent to the system and all that. But in reality, this controls your life. If you can move the ball one way or the other, I think that you should put your finger on it just a little bit, because one of these choices is going to help you position yourself in a way for the future to be a little bit better for yourself. You know what I mean? You can choose we can turn America into Moloch and just like really ramp up the abortion, or we could go with the person who's probably the Antichrist, but the economy might be a little bit better, which will help me then get a little bit more money for the coming collapse. These are my situations. And this is what we're constantly presented with as humans, is like, this is a fallen world, bro. It's not going to be great. Make your choice. The choices are clear. But one of the choices is really easy and it's really good. You know, it's like God sent his son. He died in brutal fashion. It was a huge blood sacrifice, the biggest blood sacrifice that has ever happened on the earth. And they're telling you that he did it for you. So it's like, well, there's a choice that you can choose that every single time, or you could ignore that fact and move away from it. A lot of people do and then complain about free will. And I'm like, I don't know. We had like that. That's a good choice if I had to pick that one every time, although it doesn't apply, right? There's like different circumstances where you have to actually make more nuanced choices. So yeah.
It's like choose your own Armageddon adventure. It's pretty crazy, man. We got a few minutes left. I want to get to what the hell's happening in Indiana. What you guys were mentioning before the show, something about some Old Testament entity influencing people. Talk a little bit about this.
So that one is really fascinating. Basically what happened is I think we mentioned earlier, we're big fans of Tony Merkel and the Confessionals, and Tony has been doing a lot of great work on this front. And then we ended up finding our own testimony of the same event. So basically what's happening here is people are coming and they're sharing their testimonies, and they are describing a scenario in which they are being petitioned to sign up for a coming war. And they're being petitioned by a certain entity. And it turns out that overwhelmingly, this entity is Baal. And so the experience kind of goes like, I find myself in a cave system underground. I'm walking for a long time. Eventually, I come upon what is only described as a throne room. It's a giant cavernous area with a throne in the center, and a man is sat upon it. And that man will make you an offer. And it's an offer of recruitment. Some people have taken it and told wild stories, and other people have denied it. The person that we talked to in particular wasn't recruited by Baal, but was recruited in this sort of once in a mushroom experience, then other times completely uninfluenced by psychedelics. This is just happening in his waking life. He's laying down because voices are speaking to him, telling him it's time to have a communication. And so all of a sudden he goes through this experience. But he is recruited by different entities. There's a blue guy that's seemingly made of like plasma. And there are human beings that are operating on him, telling him to calm down because he's waking up in what feels like an abduction experience. And they're saying, calm down. You've consented to this a long time ago, before you were even born, I believe is what they said. And, you know, he's not very thrilled about it. But I won't go too much into his story. It's just that what ends up happening is you start to develop a connective tissue. So there's people are having these really profound visions. They're being asked to partake in some sort of coming war. They're being recruited by one entity or another, one of which repeatedly seems to be Baal. And they are having this happen in sort of a spiritual realm. Well, it turns out the number has reached like 6, 7, 8 people or something like that don't have any communication to one another, although a few of them do. Some of them are within a friend group, but the other ones are totally, like the guy that we talked to, totally unrelated to these people. Come to find out, they all live in Indiana. Come to find out, they all live in southern Indiana. And so we start to speculate, okay, let's say you're going to a realm, and you're having this spiritual experience where this guy is in a throne room and he's trying to recruit you, but it's happening underground specifically. So let's take a look and see what's underground in southern Indiana. Turns out the largest cave system in America is underground in Indiana. It stretches from the Appalachia Mountains and it heads west, and it is absolutely massive. In fact, some people might actually be familiar with it because a long time what went viral was this idea that if you laid over one map over another, one map being the map of missing children, and you lay that over the map of cave systems in America, there's a direct correlation. So it seems like all these children are going missing in the same area. Now it gets a little bit stranger Because what happens is I'm talking about this on stream one day, and somebody pops into my stream, and they say, "Hey, have you ever heard of the book Angelology?" And they go on to describe a fictional book that is about Nephilim and fallen angels who are underground plotting to rise up again and are amassing an army. And they are in 3 locations. It's like Serbia, China, and Indiana. So when you hear that, you go, that is, I mean, I was floored because I'm doing at the time, a comedy show. I do another show. It's called Timeline Cleanse, and it's just comedy. But this person sought me out and is talking about this in the comments. I'd never seen them before. So it stopped me in my tracks. And I tried to look it up, but it's written by a woman who just uses incredibly flowery language to describe every single event that's taking place, to the point where I'm just like, I'm more of a nuts and bolts guy. I just want the information. I don't want the metaphors. And so I've not been able to get through it. It's kind of painful, but I find that oftentimes within these works of fiction, there are elements of truth. And I think that that's what makes fiction compelling, is when it's parallel to something that is true and then deviates a little bit, and then we get to have fun. So yeah, I mean, it seems to be in southern Indiana, there is a lot of people. You have to imagine, if there's that many people, well, what about people that don't listen to the confessionals? What about people that don't listen to Nephilim Death Squad? What about people that have their own experiences, don't listen to podcasts, and are mortified to even tell anybody about it? So there's probably a few other people rolling around there. And what's also worth noting is that over this cave system, just to the west, over the border of Indiana into Illinois, there is a place called the Garden of the Gods. And there's 2 Gardens of the Gods, and people will often remind me there's another one someplace else. But
it's
this
right,
one is,
Colorado Springs.
Yeah, Colorado Springs is the other one. This one is in Illinois. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating about that is, if you look it up, it is a really high concentration of cryptid sightings. So people have seen all sorts of things in this area, from Bigfoot to, little people, gnomes, and things of that nature. And I find that fascinating because I do believe that these entities are real. I do think that the Bible has a very good handle on the nature of them. I think they are adversarial. I think they are rebellious, and they rebelled against God and were cast out for it. And then I think they went on to corrupt mankind. So I think that they have a tendency to invert and pervert things that are like God's laws. So if you have the Garden of Eden, it almost makes sense that you would have a garden of the gods, multiple gods, right? Because I think we've said it on the last episode that we were on. I believe that the Vedic pantheon, the Greek pantheon, I believe all those things are real. I just think that they are the fallen. And that's where things become very dicey, right? Because you're getting all of your mythos from the bad guys, and they're telling you, we created you, we did X, Y, and Z. But really, we rebelled against God and were cast out of heaven, and God created you. So I have a lot of empathy for those other religions. I just think that they were deceived. And so when you see like the Garden of Eden, and then you see the Garden of the Gods, plural, here in Illinois, in America, where, outside of the Native Americans, it's not like we have some polytheistic group that was as influential as like the Egyptians or the Greeks or the Mayans or anything like that. We still have that here. So I am getting my suspicions, and we're working on a documentary, I think, where we're going to go and explore that cave system and just kind of show this through line. Very much what we've been talking here, right? It's like you have this rise of psychedelic culture and MK Ultra techniques that suddenly become available to the average person, and the average person starts to have bizarre experiences. And through one testimony after another, patterns start to emerge. And these entities get names. And these names, like, by the way, the guy that we talked to, his name is Colin. He said that one of the entities did identify itself as Anu, which is a Sumerian Anunnaki entity.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I mean,
God of death.
The god of death. These things, they repeat. The patterns emerge if you're willing to look at them with a critical eye. And all of a sudden, a pretty compelling picture starts to be developed. And I guess it also makes a good book in angelology.
Here's another small tidbit that we came upon today. So one of 100 or so that military bases that people presume are there or know, like a lot of these are confirmed. This one seems to be confirmed in the counties of Bedford and Lawrence, Indiana. There are active old mines that are being used that people claim are as a deep underground military base. And, luck would have it, Bedford and Lawrence County are in southern Indiana, right around where we have been looking at this. Obviously, if there's going to be a huge cave system, this is like, the military will use something that's already there to build out what's there. But tie that in with cryptid sightings, tie that in with psychedelic usage, tie that in with paranormal experiences from people there, dog men running around, weird shit like that. This Indiana is a strange place, and I'm glad
It's
I
also
don't
where
live there.
Stranger Things is. Stranger Things
also where
takes place
Stranger
in
Things-
Indiana.
Now,
Yeah.
I remember the story on the confessionals of the gentleman that found this insane book, and he also had the similar experience where he was taken underground and offered a deal with this entity that claimed to be Baal. Was this in Indiana as well? Did that take place in the same area?
If it's the one that I'm thinking of, yeah. It just happens
So-
over and over again. It was something that Tony
strange
actually
book.
didn't say it out loud initially.
Yeah. The strange book you're talking about, is that the fictional book that Tony had? Is that the story you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it
See,
is.
I wasn't sure if Tony ever got his hands on it. I know he was speaking with a gentleman who claimed to have it. I don't know if he ever.
Yeah,
ended
he
up
got
getting
his hands on it.
Oh,
And
okay.
he's kept it under wraps because the author has I guess ruffled some feathers when it's a woman, and when she created that book it really ruffled a lot of feathers, and so there's not very many like it in circulation anymore. She stopped publication. It almost makes me wonder if angelology is it, just because of the maybe not, but either way, yeah, Tony plays that one very close to the heart. He's doing it out of respect for the author, which I understand, because she does not want anything to do with it anymore. She wishes it was just gone, but unfortunately, it seems to be a big part of this, story. So, but he's done a good job of keeping other people from finding it. Allegedly, he said, even though there's very few copies in circulation, recently a couple of other people did find it out. He's asked them not to talk about it themselves. So I don't know what the book is, but it's also passed off as fiction. I know that. And when you read it, if you know, then you go, oh my God, this is very real. But somebody contacted us the other day, just yesterday, I think, and it's these strange noises coming from underground in Kentucky. And Kentucky, if you look at it, is right there, right in the heart of the cave systems. It's directly over it. And it sounds like tremendous movement underground, to the point where whoever was in the forest recording this was pretty terrified. And throughout history, not like, let's say recent history, since the early 2000s, it's not strange to come across these videos where it sounds like a great, like, metal desk being shoved across a floor, and it's echoing, and people are in the forest and they're looking around at the sky. They can't determine the source of the noise, but it's so loud. I think whatever's been going on is going on underground, and it's much more than just deep underground military bases. It's like there are stories as a truck driver who makes deliveries to these deep underground military bases, which is not shocking, right? They need supplies. They're there. The military's there. They need supplies. But he was told not to utter the name of Jesus Christ in this bunker. And also he swears that he's caught a glimpse of a man walking down a hallway that was just simply too large to be a man, like towering in these hallways, by the way, that are absolutely megalithic. The ceilings in these underground caverns, I have seen some of them. There is footage from them. It's the size of like a 7-story home or something like that, like an apartment building. That's how tall it is. And so he said whatever was walking down this corridor was so huge that he couldn't even believe that he saw it for a second, but he only caught it as it moved out of sight, just walking along. So anecdotal stories, but eventually they pile up to the point where you're like, well, what am I looking at here?
Well, this reminds me of a guest I had on a very long time ago who claimed to have been born into this powerful Illuminati family, this whistleblower, one of these guys that has no evidence for anything. But he said something interesting. He said that he was taken underground several times to different high-level military locations underground all over the country, and he had the ability to telepathically communicate with these giants that they kept underground. Some of them were in stasis, some of them were in the process of waking up because there was about to be this uprising of these giants, which is You were just talking about that, so I found that pretty interesting.
Well, look, I mean, remember the old email leaks with Hillary Clinton where she's looking for the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh and the location of the buried Nephilim. And this is supposed to be like in Iraq somewhere. And we look at those, if you're a normie and you go, like, I simply don't know what to do with that. But I think that's what this is all about. And also, I think what's worth noting here is we do a show with a guy named Ed Mabry.
Yeah, I've had Ed on a few times.
I love Ed. He's a great guy. We do the Book of Revelation breakdown on Fridays. And he said something that's very fascinating. He believes that the reason these various entities speak telepathically, we look at that as like an amazing power, right? And it's jarring when people have these experiences with alien abductions or cryptid encounters. They're like, it spoke in my mind and it's shocking. He looks at it as a weakness. He says they don't have the ability to prophesy. And so because the word is what God made everything with, right? The most powerful thing, if you're a Christian, is the word of God. And it seems that in Ed Mabry's estimation, the way you engage in spiritual warfare as a physical being in this realm is through speech. It's like when you speak something, this is what the New Agers call like manifestation. You speak it, it exists in the spiritual realm. It eventually manifests slower, but it does happen in the physical realm. Ed Mabry just says that's prayer. And I go, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense in my opinion. And so if you take that as the truth and you start to experiment with that, it makes a lot of sense why these things can't actually speak to you, because to speak is to prophesy, and to prophesy is to engage in spiritual warfare. And these beings don't have that ability. So I find it interesting that what we perceive as something that's like a power and it makes them feel superior to us might actually not be the case at all.
Right on, man. This is great stuff. Choose your own apocalyptic adventure. We may have giants, we may have aliens, we may have parasitic butt beings. I don't know. Anything is possible these days. But gentlemen, thank you again for coming on. This was awesome. We'll definitely be doing it again. Before we close out, remind the audience once more where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at David L. Corbo on Twitter. You can come over there and have a lot of fun. We have a lot of wild conversations. And otherwise, you can find Nephilim Death Squad virtually anywhere you find your podcast. But YouTube has been censoring us pretty heavily lately. We almost lost the account. If you go there, our catalog is almost non-existent. We only left up the safe episodes. So if you want to catch this on video, consider going over to Rumble, or if you want to support our work, patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad. You'll have access to all of our video content.
Yeah, you can find me at toplobster.com. That's where I do my merch service, Top Lobster with an A everywhere else. And yeah, find us on Patreon because we're just like, we do like 6-7 episodes a week, I'd say. And it gets put to Patreon first. Our live audience is awesome. They're kept in we keep them in like a little separate cattle ranch where we just like they're a part of the show. So we have the same characters popping up all the time. It's a fun time. If you like the show, if you like with this crazy stuff we're talking about, you want to be part of it, that's the way to do it.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you again. Like I said, we'll definitely do this again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. We'll see you then.